Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you this morning? Wide awake? Who among us has finished all of your Christmas shopping? That's not enough, by the way. If you don't know this, it's really soon. Like really, really soon. And if you're living in the myth that Amazon will solve your problems, they will not. You're right against the wall for ordering stuff. So don't look at your phone now. Some of you are like, "Thanks, man. Sermon was worth it today. I'm done listening to you." But stay engaged. But I would recommend by the time you go to bed tonight, if you're ordering something, you should do that. It probably still won't get here on time. Does anyone shop in malls anymore? Anybody do that? Yeah? Just the youngest among us. Okay. I don't know what that means. If you have shopped in a mall, you've gotten to hear some carols and some Christmas music. People are very divided on this, by the way, on people that really like Christmas music and people that really don't. And the people that really do like it, but definitely the people that don't, you usually have one or two songs that you really, really like, and then two that you really, really don't like. I don't know which ones you don't like. I'm going to say one right now, and it might be, it tends to be one of the ones people don't like for some reason. And do you know the Christmas song, "Do You Hear What I Hear"? Who here doesn't like that? Yeah, okay, it's you. You're bold about it. Strong, fast hand. Okay. People don't really like it. I'm gonna try and tell you something that might make you like it a little more. Okay. This song was written in 1962. It was written in the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So what the people who were kind of trying to procure this song did is they said, "Listen, we need you to write a song that will give people a sense of peace in the midst of all the chaos that's going on right now." And so it was two famous people at the time who now nobody knows. Noel Regney and Gloria Shane Baker. Anyone? No, okay, exactly. Apparently they were a big deal at the time. And they were kind of procured to write this song. And so they had like 100 drafts on the table and couldn't figure out what to write. Until they were walking around, Regney specifically was walking around in New York City shopping, and all through the streets, he noticed that there were people like pushing strollers of their kids and kids kind of running around and laughing and doing different kinds of things. And he noticed that over all the humdrum noise of the season, he could hear the laughter of kids was just sort of above all the noise. And something about that experience, he said, that is what Christmas is there's this other thing happening. That while all the other things are going on, all the other stresses of our season and the things that we're trying to get done, what the Christmas story tells us is there's another story, there's another song. There's something else happening if you can attune your ear to hear it. And what seems like chaos, what seems as though there's just noise all around, there's another sound, there's another song being sung. And you know the lyrics to "Do You Hear What I Hear?" I would not even dare to sing. Trust me, you don't want me to. Some of you are like, "Do it. We want to see you humiliate yourself." No, I will not. The night wind speaking to the little lamb, the shepherd boy, the king, a star, a child. It's all of these little humble things that are happening. Earthbound things, small, seemingly small things that are happening in the middle of massive change that's happening in the world. But it's in these little things. It's in this small sound that you hear something that is happening that can shape the whole world. That's what we think we're doing when we talk about Christmas. I mean, Advent, the season we're in, we've talked about any number of things that people have talked about for thousands of years when they talk about Christmas. hope and love and joy. And today we come to peace, as we talked about. And the story that we'll look at is an interesting story because it's the last character we'll look at, a guy named Zechariah, where Zechariah is sort of introduced into this Christmas story right at the beginning of Luke's gospel in the midst of kind of a whole mess and really what seems like silence. What we forget is that in the midst of the mess, God's people had been calling out for a Messiah, one that would come and transform and save and change the world. They knew that this was supposed to happen, but it hadn't been happening. Nothing had been happening. And now the Romans were occupying them. The whole world seems as though it's a mess, a little bit like now. If you read the news at all, you have to scour for just like a couple nice thoughts in the midst of a bunch of mess and the political moment we're in, what's happening all over the world. And God's people didn't look that different. And so this guy, Zechariah, has this incredible moment in the midst of a bunch of mess and seeming silence from God. Have you ever felt like God was silent? Have you ever felt like obviously you care about this thing, God, that I'm dealing with? Like this pressure in my life, this thing happening financially, this pain that I can read in the newspaper, and yet you seem silent. It seems like the kind of thing you would want to talk about, you would want to do something about. If you are who you say you are, if you are the one who loves, if you are the one who cares, if you are the one who is powerful, why in the world aren't you doing something about this in the world or in my life? Anybody ever felt like that? Are you alive? Because if you're alive, you think that. And here's what I love about the Bible. The Bible doesn't create cartoon images of how God works in the world. When we read the scriptures, what we believe we're reading is history. We believe we're reading something that tells us how God has interacted in the world in such a way that we can now look for how God is interacting in the world and will interact in the world. We don't read in the Bible stories that are magical and seem separate from the lives that you and I live. The stories that we read, we believe happen in history and are the ways we learn ways that God interacts so that we can look for him now, so that we can attune our ear to hear what it is that he's up to. So this story is very similar to that. Listen to this in Luke chapter 1. It goes like this. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife, Elizabeth, was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly, but they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were very old. Once Zechariah's division was on duty, and he was serving as priest before God. He was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Okay, so just pause there. Here's an interesting thing that happens. The text tells us a few interesting things. You might not understand the circumstance, so it's worth talking about it for just a minute, because it gives you a sense of how important this moment is. There were thousands of priests that were in different families. And what would happen on the Holy of Holies is one of those tribes, those families, was called forward, just one. And when that one family was drawn forward, they would draw lots, which, there's a bunch of different arguments on how this happened. I find the most interesting kind of way that people argue about it is it was effectively like drawing straws. And if you got the short straw, you were the one that was chosen, okay? So this is completely by chance. It's completely random, but it is quite an honor to be the family that's in charge of the Holy of Holies. They go in, they kind of clean it up, and they burn the incense, they do all little stuff, because this is the very place that God's presence is supposed to be resting, right? So this is a big deal for the priest to be chosen. And then if you're the one person chosen, that's like the height of honor. Now, here's the thing that's weird about it, is it's random, like you're drawing straws, and it's in the randomness you believe that God is choosing. Does this make sense? So that's kind of the whole scenario. So when Zechariah draws the short straw, he's very old. I mean, you might go your whole life and never be chosen, right? You do your whole life as a priest, you're never chosen, but it happens to be this is his day. And what makes it really interesting is that after you go in, one person goes in and does all these little things. Once they do that, when they come back out, all the people are assembled and they get to preach what amounts to a sermon of what they believe brings hope to the people of God in that time. So you're chosen by family, then you, and then you get to do this special talk. Does this make sense? It's a really, really big deal. Now, what Luke does, that he does kind of just to tell us something, because it's important in a moment, is on the side he says, I know this was random, but it also turns out that they're really righteous, good people. They're godly people. They're people that actually pray. They're people that actually seek God. I know you will find this hard to believe, but there are pastors and priests that are not good people. You're supposed to laugh. That was a joke. So you're like, why is that a joke? That's obvious. But I know, I know you find that surprising. But so Luke wants to pause and say, it turns out these are like really good people. They love the Lord. They're righteous. They're holy people. They do the best they can with God. And yet he says another thing that's really interesting. But they were childless. She was not able to conceive. So in this time where God's people experience silence, both Zechariah and Elizabeth are also feeling their own kind of silence. Anybody that's been through this knows what I'm talking about. I don't have to tell you. But for those of you that haven't, the awkward, anxious experience of wanting to have children and not having them. It is awkward and painful and anxious. And what the text is telling us is that they're going through this pain, Zechariah and Elizabeth, in the background, month after month, week after week, waiting, hoping, and they don't have a child. And now they're at an age that they're thinking it's probably too late. And I'm sure they're wondering, and I'm sure they're the kinds of people, if we understand the text, that they've been praying. They've been asking God for this. I'm sure they're asking God. I'm sure they're asking all their friends. Like, this is what we want. Well, surely this is what God wants. And so you have these people who have done everything right, and yet this really important part of their life has not worked. That's really painful. We all have places in our life like this, but for Zechariah's big day, this is what's in the background. So there he goes and he walks in, and this is where it gets, actually, it reads a bit like a comedy. Let me read it to you. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. So he goes in to do his thing. He's probably rehearsing his sermon, because he knows he's going to get a big sermon in a minute, right after he gets done with all the stuff he's supposed to do. And all of a sudden, there's an angel. And Zechariah saw him. He was startled and gripped with fear, but the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you're to call him John. He'll be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. He will go on before the Lord in the spirit and the power of Elijah, and turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom and the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Silence forever, prayers unanswered. On Zechariah's big day, he's surprised. And an angel says, the thing you've hoped for, the thing everybody's hoped for, has happened and is happening, and you're a part of the story. What should he do? Fall down on his face, start weeping? Do a little jig? A lot of good options, right? I mean, he could do all kinds of things. Well, he doesn't do any of those things. If you've never read the story, this is where it gets interesting. Zacharias asked the angel, how can I be sure of this? He asks an angel in the Holy of Holies on his specific day that he was chosen. You sure? Prove it. I'm an old man. He says, my wife's well along in years. I love this part. There is no way for me to see the next part without seeing Gabriel shaking his head. The angel said to him, I am Gabriel. I mean, listen, I don't know, maybe you see angels all the time, man. Maybe this is just like a normal day for you. I thought this was going to be kind of a big day for you. Maybe not. I stand in the presence of God. I have been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. This is good news, you moron. And then he says, and now you will be silent. You will not be able to speak until the day this happens, because you didn't believe my words, which will come true at the appointed time. He goes, do you know who I am? Oh, okay, I'll tell you who I am. I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I just gave you good news, and you behave like a moron. So here's what happens now. You're not going to be able to talk. And you won't be able to talk until the baby's born. The comedy routine continues. Verse 21, meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah, wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. They're like all standing there waiting for the sermon. They're like, I wonder what's going to happen. When he came out, he couldn't speak to them. They realized he'd seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. Okay, so he comes out, and they're like, begin. And he's like, I'm like, what the heck is this? And I mean, it is a straight comedy routine because Zechariah was a moron. He returns, of course, and they conceive. Okay, so everything the angel says happens. Now, in the midst of what's funny, what we realize is there's something that happens in Zechariah that I think is instructive for us. Barbara Brown Taylor, who comments on this text, says this. She says that Zechariah experienced what most of us experience, which is a failure of imagination, a fear of disappointment, and a habit of hopelessness. A failure of imagination, a fear of disappointment, and a habit of hopelessness. Zechariah was so accustomed to God's silence. He was so used to the fact that what he asked for didn't happen. What everybody was waiting for wasn't coming. So my job is to do the best I can, to be as faithful as I can, to just try to do the next thing and just get through this life, get through day after day, deal with the hopelessness, deal with the pain, deal with the suffering, because that's what it means to honor God. And you know what? He's not wrong. I mean, listen, if in the midst of what's painful and difficult, your choices are be rude and idiot and do whatever you want versus be like a good person, choose being a good person. Like, do the right thing even when things don't seem to go the way you want them to go. In just sort of indulging your own pleasures and desires, you're not going to get what you want anyway. So he's a good model. And yet, when it comes, when the moment avails itself, he is so discouraged, he's so hopeless, that he turns quickly into sort of a cynical, like, prove it to me vibe. And I don't know about you, but I find that many, many people live in that mode. They live in a mode where they're mostly assuming people are just out to get them. Frankly, they might even have attributed that to God himself. See, they've had something that they feel like they need or what they want, and God hasn't done that, and therefore, people like me or maybe people like you that show up saying, you know, there's some good news about this thing that has happened in Jesus Christ. They're like, yeah, I'm not buying it. Nah. There's this other thing that we really need. But here's what the Christmas story says. A Christmas story tells us, and what we find in Jesus is that the thing that we really, really need, the hope that we all are actually looking for, is not found often in the places that we're looking, but is found in this strange story of a baby in a manger in the middle of nowhere in Bethlehem. The radical nature of our faith says that what you actually need, what you really need, what the world really needs, is a life with God that's found in Jesus. That God came for us instead of us going to him. He came to us in the person of Jesus. That though you know you're messed up, you are way more messed up than you realize. However, anybody here realize they're screwed up? Oh man, it's so much worse. Like whatever you're aware of, you're way worse than you know. Just ask your spouse. If you run out of things, they'll tell you. I mean, just ask your parents if you're a kid. Just ask your brother or sister. List everything you know that's screwed up about you, and they will triple the list. That's not God. See, God could not just triple the list. Compared to God, we're a mess. More than we could ever imagine. And this is why God came for us instead of the other way around. Like we can't reach to him. He reached to us in Jesus. Can you hear this story as good news? Over above the noise and the mess of the world you live in, can you hear this story that offers you hope in this season? In the silence, when it feels as though God doesn't speak to the things that you want, you need, here's the good news. He has already spoken. He has already made a way. There is a sound, there is a song, there is a life that's available to us in Jesus Christ if we'll simply receive it. And there's many of us that have heard this song, but we've forgotten it. The busyness of our lives, the weariness, the tiredness. So I want to just read to you in finishing Zechariah's song as soon as John's born. This is the first things he gets to say, right? He's walking around silent for months going, I shouldn't have said that to that angel. Can you imagine the stuff he was thinking during that time? Like, I am such a moron. But here's the song. Listen to the hope in it. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets of long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our ancestors and to remember his holy covenant. The oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies, to enable us to serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High. You will go on before the Lord and prepare a way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. That's quite a pronouncement. P.S. While he sings this, Rome is still oppressing them. The world is still a mess. And yet he says something is happening if we can just pay attention to it. And it's found in this person, Jesus. My prayer is that in this busyness of this season, somehow you return your heart to Jesus. Some of you may be listening, you've never heard this before. Today is a good day to just say yes to Jesus Christ. Receive this gift. But for those of us that have, this would be a good day to remember that this song, this tune is playing above the noise. Amen?